I wanted to share something that I recently noticed in the book of Ruth, and I think it's quite interesting. That we seem to be missing a key part of this story because we focus real heavily on the romance between Ruth and Boaz. And that's a story totally worth looking at. But we like fast forward through the first chapter so we can get to that. But that first chapter is really important. So I'm going to try to give you sort of a Cliff Notes version of this. That there's Naomi and her husband Elimelech, and they leave Bethlehem, where they're from, because there's a famine. They're going off somewhere else to find food so they can survive. They take their two sons. We don't know anything about these sons other than their names, which I'm surely not pronouncing right, but it's Mahlon and Kilion. I know those names mean sick and dying, which is not very encouraging. Maybe it's something from that famine, or I don't know. But they head off, they land in Moab, and that's where they kind of set up living their lives. Sometime after getting there, Naomi's husband Elimelech dies. Then the sons get married, so it doesn't seem like their wives probably ever met their dad. So they never saw Elimelech. He didn't make an impression on them, I don't think. Then both the sons die, and like I said, we never heard anything about them, so I don't know what they were like. But what we know is the normal thing to happen in that scenario, once those sons die, and we've got 3 widows living together. We've got Naomi and the 2 daughters-in-law. The sensible, logical, normal thing would have been for Ruth and Orpah, the 2 wives, to go back to their families. When a woman lived with her father until she got married, and then if she was widowed young, if her husband died, and she didn't have kids of her own and had established her own family, then what she did was return to her father's house. Basically, she went back home, lived with her family, and hopefully was able to eventually find another husband and kind of reboot her life and try again. Ruth and Orpah don't do that. Something makes them stay with Naomi. There's something about Naomi that is attractive enough that they're like, you know what? I'm going to stay here. I would rather live as a widow with you than go back to my family and live normal. And we don't know how long that lasts before Naomi gets word that things are better back in Bethlehem. She's like, all right, I'm going to go home. And even at that point, they're both like, cool, we're going to come with you. Because they'd still rather be with Naomi than in everything they have ever known. Something is special about Naomi, the way she lives her life. And it certainly seems like it has a lot to do with her faith, with her relationship with God, because that's what we start seeing. They're heading out. Naomi says, girls, this is me. You go back home, do the normal thing. And initially, they both say, no, we're going to stick with you. Naomi breaks down the math for him and says, guys, seriously, even if I got started tonight having more kids, which is not going to happen because I don't have a husband, but even if I did, you're going to sit around and wait for them to be old enough to marry them, and then, it's not going to work out. Just go. Orpah, accepts the logic and goes and does the normal thing. She goes back to her family. But even at that, Ruth is, it's where she famously says, no, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. This is stressing and saying, what you have is so special, so different, that I want that. I don't want everything that I've ever known, everything that I've ever seen in my life and always considered normal. I want what you have instead. And so she comes back with Naomi. And it's later you get the whole thing with, Ruth and Boaz, and it doesn't take a seminary degree to see that Boaz represents Jesus. He's their redeemer, the kinsman redeemer, and he kind of rescues them from their destitute poverty and stuff, and kicks off a legacy from them. And totally great. Like I said, I might have to do a part 2 to look at that story. But Naomi's role in that is pointing Ruth to him. Ruth is the outsider, the non-believer. Naomi is pointing her to the Redeemer. So it's pointing the non-believer to Jesus. Ruth is the Christian who's living a life that looks so different that the outsider wants what she has. And this is what we're supposed to be doing. As Christians, you do need to have connections with people who are outsiders so that if all you're ever with is other Christians, then no one else is being drawn in. But I think even more important than that, and maybe a prerequisite for that, is Jesus needs to make a difference in your life. Like, there's a great line, what's the movie? To Save a Life. The guy who's just starting to get into this whole Christian thing kind of gets so frustrated with the other people around him. He's like, what's the point of all this if you're not going to let it change you? And it's like, Jesus should make a difference. There's an old preacher from like a couple hundred years ago that I love. It's George MacDonald. And he explained it, and it's like, I don't care about any of your little doctrines and things that you want to, make into this deep philosophical argument. It's like, what difference has Jesus made in your life? What have you done today simply because Jesus said to do it? What have you not done simply because Jesus said to not do it? Is following Jesus making a difference in your life? And it's that difference that was so attractive to Ruth and Orpah that they were prepared to leave everything they had ever known to follow Naomi. Naomi's faith made her look different, and it was a different that other people wanted. Is following Jesus making your life different? And is that different something that other people want?